Because of COVID, we were having residents all check-in in the parking lots behind the new apartments. And I remember we were sitting there in the parking lot, and I had some resident assistants around me, and they were all helping check in everything. And someone was on the computer and said, "I think there's a storm coming." And he opened it up and he said, "So what is that?"
We were in the office. 12:30 is one of the shifts when our custodians leave. And a few of them were coming in and telling us that they heard Marshalltown had 80, 90 mile an hour winds and it was heading our way. So we walked out and we saw the cloud coming. It was just black coming towards us, and then it hit.
When the derecho came, we were actually all in the caf here during the middle of lunch. And you see a storm come up. We've got a lot of windows here. We all noticed the storm, but it's Iowa, very used to storms, so very used to them coming up quickly. And it took all of about 5 or 10 minutes to notice that this was something different.
When the storm hit, I was in Nassif House and we had prospective students visiting, so my very first thought was to get them to safety in the basement of Nassif House. We had several hundred students that had just moved on to campus, brand new to the college. It quickly occurred to me that we needed to get messaging out, and we were unable to do it on campus. Thankfully, we had a staff member, Natalie, who was out of state, and so my ability to reach you and have that conversation about what was happening on campus became critical.
There were 2 families that were going to arrive on campus at 1 o'clock. Fortunately, they were on campus. They were already in the parking lot. So we told them to come on inside. We got them checked in and situated. And a few minutes later, we ended up going downstairs into the Nassif basement to take shelter from the storm. And they waited down there with us for an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Because as the wind increased and stayed consistent, we started having branches flying into windows. You could tell the violence of the storm was increasing. We got everybody taken back to our storeroom and put into the most secure spot that we have in this building.
You could hardly see outside. It was kind of gray and green. You saw tree branches flying everywhere.
As the winds were going, I could see stuff floating all throughout the air. I've been through tornadoes, but this was even more intense than a tornado. I could just see the destruction happen on campus. Trees were falling. It was just kind of a surreal experience to see that happening.
I didn't hear from Julie again for probably 3 or 4 hours after the storm came through. And then at that point, she had shared with me that the power was out, our internet service was going out, we didn't have access to cellular service that was reliable, and it was just incredibly difficult to communicate with people outside of Cedar Rapids.
Text messages were being dropped. Phone calls were being dropped in the middle of our conversations. At one point, I drove to Anamosa because we could have a conversation, a very thorough one, about what was happening on campus without the fear of the call being dropped multiple times.
So I was then sending messages on social media and replying to comments on social media late into the evening on Monday and early in the morning in the following days. That was something that we were doing until 10 or 11 o'clock at night for a few days to make sure that we were getting accurate information out to people as quick as possible.
The destruction that I saw once the storm was over was unlike anything that I had ever seen before, and I've lived in Iowa a majority of my life. I remember looking out the windows and seeing downed trees everywhere, even trees that were probably 100 years old were torn down.
At least 100 trees, up to 150 here on campus that came down. So they were over sidewalks, on steps, on buildings. There was building debris everywhere. We even had the scoreboard over at the football field got bent straight over.
Our whole crew was here till 9 o'clock that night, just making sure buildings were secure, windows were cleaned up, boarded up, and all of the main sidewalks were open because we had students moving in. We knew that they needed to be able to get from their dorms to the cafeteria in a safe manner. Chad and Tom immediately grabbed the chainsaws and they started clearing off all the sidewalks, and students and staff who were here were already out helping, pulling things away, and making it so that people could get through.
Handwritten messages were one of the main ways that individuals were able to share information with students on campus. So there were staff from residence life, admission, marketing, and offices across the co-community who were handwriting notes and posting them throughout the residence halls and different buildings on campus.
So at that point, literally our RAs were going door to door, knocking on them, making sure that they were okay, assessing any damage that they might have had in the room or anything like that, and then reassuring them, here's where the procedures, here's where we're going to be moving forward on things.
With production lines being shut down and the fact that we knew we could only get into our coolers for a certain period of time, we had to actually get a message to somebody that worked here in town they lived in the Quad Cities, so once they got to the Quad Cities, they were able to call one of our counterparts in Des Moines to the next morning have food brought to us on a couple of trucks. So we were able to get in then more product that we were able to use more readily available versus having to be produced or pulled out of a fridge freezer, so that way we could keep continuing to feed the students until we were able to get more of those viable products back into the operation.
As power was restored to campus later in the week, it became clear that we still were not going to have access to internet for a while. In speaking with our internet provider, they shared that there was damage to the infrastructure a distance away from Coe's campus, and it could be days before we would have internet back on campus. We decided to reach out to IMON Communications here in Cedar Rapids. One of the things that was so helpful about working with them is they understood the type of devastation that we had experienced on campus and in the entire community, and had experienced some of that themselves. So the IMON staff worked with our IT team, into the evening and weekend, trying to get internet access restored to campus, and made that happen so that we could start the school year.
When the derecho hit, there were critical days passing in terms of advising, in terms of students' ability to shift courses, etc. I came to the realization after talking with other senior leaders, we're going to have to do what is unspeakable in the academic world, which is to completely change the academic calendar on the fly in 2 days. And that's what we did. We just blew it up, put it back together so students could learn. And I wouldn't relive it, but I would say that it taught us that we can do any changes we need when we need to. This is one of the proudest moments I've had at Coe.
Coe's response was awesome. We had an outpouring from everyone in the faculty, staff, and the students.
By Friday of the week of the storm, we had organized what we called Charlie's Campus Cleanup, which was an effort of a couple of hundred volunteers of faculty, staff, alumni, students, friends from the creative corridor, who all came together with chainsaws, trucks, and rakes, and a substantial amount of the tree debris was removed during that time, as well as an incredible amount of debris and waste from the football field and other open spaces.
The help from the campus, from the whole community, was just amazing. That the day after, we had so many people reaching out to us, stopping by our office, seeing if they could help in any way.
So fall of 2020 around this country was one of the most challenging years we've ever faced in higher ed. And whereas all colleges and universities had to deal with the pandemic, very few of us had the twin challenge of a natural disaster that took out all operations of your college campus, as well as COVID. And despite that mountain that we had to climb, the community of Coe, our faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends, parents, rallied together in a way that every single Cohawk should be proud of. The resiliency that this campus showed despite the circumstances to reopen almost as originally scheduled and get started with our academic semester so that our students could continue their academic and personal journey at the college was really extraordinary. And on behalf of the entirety of Coe College, we just want to say thank you to each and every one of you who made that recovery possible.